January 29th, 1944. Solomon Islands. Dawn. The air above Rabaul is thick with heat and the metallic scent of salt water carried inland by the trade winds. At 0614 hours, a formation of 11 Mitsubishi A6M0 fighters lifts from the coral runway, their engines screaming in unison, a sound that has become synonymous with Japanese air superiority across the Pacific. The pilots are veterans, most with over 200 combat hours. They fly in perfect Shodai formation, 3 plane elements stacked like the fingers of a clenched fist. Their mission: intercept American bombers reported over Bougainville. Their confidence: absolute. For 3 years, the Zero has been the undisputed master of Pacific skies. Lightweight, nimble, lethal. Its pilots have been trained since childhood in the philosophy of Bushido, to embrace death as cherry blossoms embrace the spring wind. They expect another victory. They expect a return as they always have, with fresh kill marks painted beneath their canopies. But 8,000 feet above them, descending through a ceiling of cumulus clouds, something new is waiting. It is bent-winged, dark blue, and it carries the weight of American industrial rage in every rivet. To understand what happens next, one must step back to 1942, when the Zero was a nightmare that American pilots whispered about in ready rooms from Midway to Guadalcanal. The Mitsubishi A6M was a masterpiece of minimalist engineering. It weighed just 4,000 pounds empty. It could turn inside any American fighter. Its 20mm cannons could shred a Wildcat in seconds. Early in the war, the kill ratio was devastating. For every Zero lost, 3 to 5 American aircraft fell from the sky. Japanese pilots spoke of their machine with reverence, calling it Ryzen, Zero Fighter, a name that carried both pride and menace. They believed, many of them sincerely, that no nation could build a fighter to match it. Certainly not the Americans, whose pilots they had been taught to view as soft, undisciplined, relying on technology rather than spirit. This was not mere propaganda. It was doctrine. The Japanese military academy at Chuchiura drilled its cadets in the supremacy of Seishin, fighting spirit, over material advantage. A true samurai needed no heavy armor, no self-sealing fuel tanks. He needed only skill, courage, and the willingness to die. The Zero embodied this philosophy. It sacrificed protection for performance. Its fuel tanks were unprotected. Its airframe was thin as paper in places, but it could outmaneuver anything the Allies could field in 1941 and 1942. And so the myth hardened into truth. Japanese pilots were invincible because their spirit was purer, their resolve harder, their philosophy superior. Then came Guadalcanal. Then came the Coral Sea. Then came the slow, grinding realization that America was not collapsing. It was building in numbers that defied comprehension. Building with philosophy the Japanese high command had fatally misunderstood. The philosophy that abundance, not austerity, wins wars. That the nation which can afford to armor its pilots, feed its soldiers steak and ice cream, and still produce 10 fighters for every one lost, is not weak. It is terrifying. And in June 1942, even as Japan celebrated its victories, the United States Navy issued a contract to Vought aircraft. The requirement was simple, brutal. Build a fighter that can climb faster, dive faster, and hit harder than anything in the sky. Armor it. Arm it with 6.50 caliber machine guns. Power it with the biggest engine we have. Make it survive. Make it kill. They called it the F4U Corsair. The first time Japanese pilots encountered the Corsair in combat, they did not believe what they were seeing. It was February 1943, over the Russell Islands. A flight of Zeros engaged what they assumed were new Hellcats. But these aircraft were different. They were larger, heavier, with wings that bent upward in an inverted gull shape, a design that looked almost comical, like a seabird frozen mid-dive. The Japanese pilots smiled behind their oxygen masks. Big American planes were easy targets. Slow, clumsy, they moved to engage. Then the Corsairs opened their throttles. The Pratt & Whitney R 2800 double Wasp engine produced 2,000 horsepower, twice that of the Zero Suke engine. The Corsair accelerated like a stone thrown from a cliff. It climbed at 3,000 feet per minute, far beyond anything the Zero could match. When the Japanese pilots tried to follow, their aircraft shuddered and stalled. When they tried to dive away, the Corsairs followed effortlessly, their heavier frames cutting through the air like guillotine blades. And when the Americans opened fire, 6 streams of .50 caliber rounds, over 2,400 rounds per minute combined, simply erased Zeros from existence. Airframes shattered, wings folded, fuel tanks, unarmored and exposed, erupted into fireballs that spiraled into the sea. One Japanese pilot, Lieutenant Sakisaburo, who survived an encounter with Corsairs over Bougainville, later wrote in his diary, "We had trained to fight with skill and honor, but this new American fighter does not duel. It hunts. It comes from above with the speed of a hawk and the weight of a boulder. Our Zeros, so graceful in a turning fight, become children's toys before it. I watched 3 of my wingmen die in less than 1 minute. There was no contest, only execution. The word spread quickly through Japanese squadrons. Avoid the bent wing fighter. Do not engage unless you have altitude and numbers. If you see it climbing toward you, run." Some pilots began to call it whistling death, after the distinctive sound its engine made in a dive, a rising, keening wail that signaled incoming annihilation. Others simply called it the devil plane, not because it was dishonorable, but because it represented something their training had not prepared them for, an enemy that could afford to make every pilot a king, every fighter a fortress, every engagement a one-sided massacre. The Corsair carried 237 gallons of fuel in self-sealing tanks. It had armor plate behind the pilot's seat, armor glass in the windscreen. It could take 20 millimeters cannon hits and keep flying. A Zero could not. A Zero, built for agility over endurance, for spirit over survival, burned when hit. Its pilots died, and America kept building more Corsairs. By the end of 1943, Vought was producing one every 3 hours. The Japanese could not replace their losses. Their best pilots, men with thousands of hours, irreplaceable skill, were dying in droves. And the Americans were training new aces in months, not years, because their aircraft gave them an advantage that no amount of satiation could overcome. But the moment that crystallized the Corsairs' dominance, the mission that became legend in both American and Japanese air forces, occurred on that January morning in 1944. His name was Lieutenant Robert M. Hansen, 23 years old, a farm boy from Lucknow, India, where his missionary parents had raised him among rice paddies and monsoon storms. He did not look like a killer. He had soft eyes, a shy smile, a habit of writing letters to his mother in his tent at night by candlelight. But when Hansen strapped into the cockpit of his F4U Corsair, something shifted. His squadron mates called him Butcher Bob, not out of cruelty, but out of awe. In 6 months of combat, he had shot down 20 enemy aircraft. His Corsair, Bureau number 17915, bore 20 small rising suns painted beneath the canopy rail. He treated the machine with an almost religious care, checking every rivet, every control surface, every round of ammunition personally before each flight. On the morning of January 29th, Hansen's division, for Corsairs, was scrambled to intercept a large formation of Japanese fighters sweeping south from Rabaul. Intelligence estimated 15 to 20 hostiles. Hansen's division climbed through broken clouds, their engines synchronized, their shadows racing across the jungle canopy below. At 12,000 feet, Hansen's wingman radioed, "Bandits, 11 o'clock low. Count 11. Zeros." Hansen did not respond immediately. He throttled back slightly, letting the division gain altitude advantage. This was the first rule of Corsair tactics. Never turn with a Zero. Never dogfight on its terms. Use speed. Use altitude. Use the terrible mathematics of kinetic energy, mass times velocity squared. The Corsair was a bullet. The Zero was a kite. And Hansen understood this in his bones. At 0629 hours, he rolled inverted and dove. The Zero pilot saw him coming. How could they not? The Corsair's dive speed approached 450 miles per hour, and the sound preceded it like thunder. But seeing and reacting are different things. Hansen selected his first target, a Zero climbing desperately to meet the attack. At 400 yards, Hansen opened fire. The 6M2 Browning machine guns roared. Tracer rounds drew a converging cone of light and lead. The Zero's engine, cowling, disintegrated. The propeller flew off in pieces. The aircraft snap-rolled and fell, trailing smoke. Hansen did not watch it die. He was already tracking the second target. This one tried to turn. Fatal mistake. The Corsair's high-speed stall was far beyond the Zero's, and Hansen simply pulled harder, accepting the G-forces at great his vision, keeping his gun sight locked. He fired a 3-second burst. The Zero's cockpit exploded. The pilot, name unknown, age unknown, family unknown, was killed instantly. The aircraft tumbled into jungle below, leaving a smear of burning aviation fuel across the treetops. Third kill, a Zero attempting to dive away. Hansen followed effortlessly, the R-2800 engine screaming at full throttle. At 300 yards, he fired again. The Zero's left wing sheared off at the root. The aircraft cartwheeled into the sea, hitting the water at terminal velocity. There was no parachute, no time to bail out, just sudden, absolute silence. And still Hansen dove, pulled up, climbed, dove again, a rhythm as methodical as a butcher cutting meat. His wingmen later testified that they could barely keep him in sight. He was not dogfighting. He was processing. Target, fire, kill. Target, fire, kill. The Japanese formation, so confident minutes before, disintegrated into chaos. Pilots broke in all directions, abandoning formation discipline, seeking only survival. But Corsairs do not chase. They intercept. Hansen climbed back to altitude, rolled, and dove again. Fourth, fifth, sixth. Each Zero fell in a different manner. Some in flames, some in pieces, some simply ceasing to fly and dropping like stones. Hansen's gun cameras recorded it all in grainy black and white. Wings folding, cockpit shattering, men dying faster than their minds could process. By 0638 hours, 9 minutes after the engagement began, 5 Zeros were confirmed destroyed. By 0641-7, Hansen's ammunition counter was dropping toward empty. His airspeed indicator had pegged past the red line multiple times. His engine temperature was climbing into dangerous territory. He did not care. 8th kill. A Zero climbing vertically in a desperate hammerhead stall maneuver. Hansen met it head-on, firing a deflection shot as they passed canopy to canopy. The Zero's fuselage ruptured. The pilot, still alive, struggled to jettison his canopy. He failed. The aircraft inverted and spun, carrying him down. 9th, 10th, 11th. At 0644 hours, Lieutenant Robert M. Hansen pulled out his final dive, his guns empty, his fuel gauge reading less than a quarter tank. Below him, the ocean was dotted with oil slicks and floating debris. Of 11 Zeros that had launched from Rabaul that morning, none returned. 11 pilots, men with names, families, dreams of victory, were dead. 11 aircraft, representing thousands of hours of skilled labor in Japanese factories now starving for aluminum and oil, were scrap metal on the ocean floor. Hansen's wingman radioed, voice tight with disbelief. "Butcher, confirm 11 kills?" Hansen's response, recorded in the squadron log, was 5 words. 11 confirmed. Winchester. Returning to base. Winchester, the radio code for out of ammunition. As if he were reporting a fuel state or a mechanical issue. As if he had not just authored the most lopsided air combat victory in the Pacific Theater. When news of Hansen's sortie reached Japanese command, there was no official response. No communique. No acknowledgement. But in the debriefing rooms of Rabaul, among the surviving pilots, a silence settled, thick and suffocating as the jungle humidity. The veterans, the men who had flown since Pearl Harbor, who had strafed Clark Field and Colombo and Darwin, understood what this meant. It was not just the loss of 11 aircraft. It was a symbolic erasure of Japanese air superiority. One American in one machine had done what an entire squadron should not have been able to do, and he had done it not through luck, not through desperation, but through cold, industrial, methodical dominance. The Corsair was not just a fighter. It was a message. It said, "We can afford to arm every pilot with 6 heavy machine guns while you ration rifle bullets. We can armor our aircraft while you strip weight to save fuel. We can train replacement pilots by the thousands while you send boys with 50 hours into combat. Because your aces are dead, we can build a fighter so powerful that your best tactics, the maneuvers you perfected over 3 years, are irrelevant, and we will keep building them until every sky over every island is ours. By war's end, the F4U Corsair had achieved an 11-to-1 kill ratio against Japanese aircraft, 11 enemy planes destroyed for every Corsair lost. Over 12,500 were produced. They served not only with the U.S. Navy Marines, but with the Royal Navy, the Royal New Zealand Air Force, and later in Korea, where they flew ground attack missions into the 1950s. The bent wing design, once mocked by skeptics as aerodynamically unsound, proved brilliantly effective. It allowed a massive propeller while keeping the landing gear short and strong. The inverted gull wing became iconic, as recognizable as the Spitfire's elliptical wing or the Zero's lightweight grace. But for the Japanese pilots who faced it, the Corsair was not a technological curiosity. It was the sound of their philosophy collapsing. They had been taught that spirit transcends material, that honor outweighs armor, that a warrior with a pure heart needs no heavy machine. And for a time, against weaker opponents, this had seemed true, but the Corsair and the nation that built it proved a different truth, that in industrial war, abundance is its own form of honor, that protecting your pilots is not weakness, but wisdom, that the country which can afford to give every fighter 6 guns, every soldier 3 meals, every sailor a bunk and a shower, is not decadent, it is dominant. Lieutenant Robert M. Hansen did not survive the war. He was shot down 6 days after his 11-kill sortie, on February 3, 1944, during a strafing run over Rabaul. He was 23 years old. He was awarded the Medal of Honor posthumously. His final tally, 25 confirmed kills in 6 months. His Corsair, Bureau number 17915, was never recovered. It rests somewhere in the jungle of New Britain, overgrown with vines, slowly dissolving into rust and soil, a relic of the moment when American industrial might and one farm boy's cold precision rewrote the rules of air combat. Today, the F4U Corsair is remembered in museums, at air shows, and the stories old men tell their grandchildren. Its bent wings and deep blue paint have become symbols of American air power. But the real legacy of the Corsair is not in the medal or the victories. It is in what it represented to the men who faced it. The realization that ideology, no matter how fiercely held, cannot deflect bullets. That honor, no matter how deeply ingrained, cannot stop a 2,000 horsepower engine. That the philosophy of self-sacrifice, noble as it may be, is no match for philosophy of overwhelming, relentless, industrialized abundance. The Zero pilots who survived the war, those few who lived long enough to see the surrender sign aboard the USS Missouri, spoke of the Corsair with a strange mixture of fear and respect. They did not hate it. They understood it. It was a weapon of a nation that could afford to value life over death, survival over sacrifice, victory over honor. And in the end, that philosophy, the one they had been taught to despise as weak and materialistic, had won, not because it was more honorable, but because it was more human. And so the Corsair remains, a bent-winged shadow in the history books, a howling ghost in veteran memories, a testament to the fact that in war, the side that can afford to bring its pilots home usually does. And the side that cannot, no matter how brave, no matter how skilled, eventually runs out of pilots, runs out of fuel, runs out of time. 11 Zeros fell that January morning. 11 men who expected victory found only the sea. And one American farm boy who expected nothing but to do his job became a legend. Not because he sought glory, but because he flew a machine that embodied everything his enemy could no longer afford to believe. The sky does not remember honor. It remembers weight, speed, and the thunder of an R 2800 engine diving through clouds. It remembers the Corsair,